Hey there, Agile beer koozies, and welcome to another episode of Agile Bites, the podcast sponsored by Integrity Inspired Solutions, where we build software in an agile manner day in and day out. I'm drinking a Dr. Pepper Zero Sugar, and it is delicious. Dr. Pepper is not a sponsor of the podcast, so if you work for Dr. Pepper and you're listening to this podcast, hit me up because I will shill your stuff all day, not even kidding. So we are doing a series on MVPs. Specifically how it applies to that first increment of your product. In our last podcast, we sort of talked about why MVPs exist and what MVPs are, especially within the context of what I'm going to take you through. And I'm going to take you through all the facets of laying out an MVP that we use with our clients. Now, I do want to point out that there's multiple pieces that we flesh out with our clients that define what this MVP is going to look like. And even though I'm going to present them in a linear fashion, because I am bound by the fourth dimension and the space-time continuum, these facets aren't necessarily linear in how you put them together. A lot of times as you work on one piece, it will help you flesh out a different piece. Or you may go back to a piece that you thought you had already completed and revise it based on the work that you do in other pieces. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to present them in a linear fashion, and this is generally at a high level, a sequence that I think is a useful starting point, but don't feel bound by it. It really is a lot more dynamic than that. It's a lot more give and take when you see me do one of these workshops in actual execution. But today we are going to be talking about the vision. One of my favorite Queen songs is One Vision. It's on A Kind of Magic soundtrack and also shows up in the classic movie Iron Eagle. Now, I bring up the movie Iron Eagle because I like that movie. I don't really have anywhere I'm going with that specific analogy, but if you haven't seen Iron Eagle and you grew up in the 80s, I mean, what's wrong with you? Like, what? I'm not sure we can be friends, but maybe we can. But I want to talk about the vision, the one vision, according to the Queen song. The vision is the part of the MVP that captures in a few sentences why this MVP exists. And I'm presenting it as the first thing. And I'm presenting it as the first thing because the vision is what guides the MVP. It sort of gives us a way to sort of draw a fence around the MVP, and it dictates the direction of our actions. But I will say, having done MVP workshops several times, the vision is oftentimes the very last thing that we write. It's certainly commonly the last thing we write in a final form, even if we start with a provisional one. But it captures in a few sentences why the MVP exists. It's sort of like if you're a Scrum person and you come up with sprint goals. Well, sprint goals define why the sprint exists, right? Your company is giving you a sprint. What are you giving them in return? What is the reason the sprint exists? Why are you defining it? And in a sense, that's what the vision serves to do for the MVP. An MVP vision is something that is related to your hypothesis. Okay, remember, if we're building an MVP, it's because there's something we're trying to figure out. There's something we want to learn. We want to put something out there so that we can get information back. What is this hypothesis? Well, you have to come up with it, right? It's going to be something that would meaningfully change or potentially even stop investment in the project. The vision is not the hypothesis, although, I mean, if it's really a do or die thing on the hypothesis, maybe that's your vision. It's just usually it's bigger than that. But the vision is related to the hypothesis. Okay, when I give you examples, you'll kind of see how this works out. What are we trying to figure out, and how is this MVP going to do that? Vision also sort of outlines the scope at a high level. What is this MVP going to accomplish? What is the capability or capabilities we're going to offer in this MVP? And usually the vision also articulates the value of the MVP. And one of the reasons that I want to capture the value in the vision is not only does it inform the discussions that we have, but you kind of want this vision to kind of get people going, right? Like you want people to be excited about it. I want my development team to get excited about it and to feel like they're really doing something valuable, and that value is clear, even if it's exploratory. But also want the people who I'm going to give the MVP to be excited about it, right? I want to make that value proposition clear to them as well. So I don't want my vision just to say, like, the vision is we're going to see if people are going to buy this. That may be what we're trying to figure out. And that is certainly motivating to an extent, but that doesn't really get people going, right? Your developers aren't going to be like, oh, I really can't wait to build something to see if anyone would even pay for it, right? Or, if you were going to take your MVP and say, give it away for free, or you were going to have some potential beta users use it, or you were just going to put it on the market. I mean, imagine that being in your marketing copy, right? Like, get a hold of our MVP and use it because we're really going to find out if people are going to pay for this or not. Like, I mean, who gets excited about that, right? I mean, it just isn't motivating. So we want our vision to be related to the hypothesis. It isn't directly the hypothesis, but it needs to be related. And it needs to give us kind of a high level outline of what we're doing and what the value proposition of it is going to be. So I'm going to give you some examples. The danger of giving examples, of course, is that you will take this as a prescription, like my MVP visions need to look like this, or they need to follow this format or whatever. You come up with what works for you. And depending on what client I've been working with and the nature of the product, the MVP visions don't always sound the same. Some of them are more narrative, right? They're like a paragraph, 3 to 5 sentences describing what it's like to use the MVP as if I've written a little short story about it. Those can be very powerful visions. Those can be very motivating, and those can give people a really concrete idea of where this MVP is going. Others are more ideological. They're more aspirational. They're more high level. So they give us an idea of what's going on and they motivate us, but we haven't got a lot figured out yet. And so it's a little bit more free form. So I'm going to give you some examples, but with these examples, I want to give you permission, as if you needed it, to not use these formats, to not make your visions sound like my visions. Again, it's about accomplishing the goals. And what are the goals? Communicating something about the hypothesis, something about your scope, and something about your value. So here's an example. This MVP will bring our first round of users to the app by helping busy adults in Kansas to schedule pickup basketball games with their friends, to bring them a fun way to get exercise and build relationships. Okay, so what have we done here? Well, we've talked about what we're hoping happens, right? We hope we get our first round of users from this, right? It's not exploratory in that sense. We're not giving it to beta users. We're not giving it to volunteers. We really want to see if this will bring in actual users. We've talked about who this specific MVP is going to serve, busy adults in Kansas. We've talked about what it's going to enable them to do, schedule pickup basketball games with their friends. And we've also articulated why they're going to like that, because it brings them a fun way to get exercise and build relationships, right? So now we've sort of captured in this vision what we get out of it. We've captured what they get out of it, and we captured who the they is. Now, do you have to have all those ingredients in your vision? Not necessarily. And I did all that in one sentence, and it is a bit of an awkward sentence. I probably would want to break it up into 2 or 3 or something like that, but you get the idea, right? So here's another example. This MVP will increase the number of restaurant owners with vegan dishes on the app by helping them to broadcast their specials to vegans in their area and exposing them to a larger audience. Okay, so again, I'm alluding to our hypothesis, right? We want more restaurant owners on the app. Well, how are we going to do this? Well, we're going to help them broadcast their specials to vegans in the area and expose them to a larger audience. So that is a vision that's taken actually directly from an app that we built. Here's another one. This one comes from a client's app. This MVP will save time and make life better for our underwriters by bringing data from our legacy systems into the quote process and avoiding the need to do duplicate entries. So here, we're not seeing if anyone's going to buy this. This is an internal use product. So what do we care about? Well, we care about making the lives better of the people who are going to use this. And how are we making their life better? Well, we're going to save them some time. They don't have to do duplicate data entry anymore. And what we're hoping to do is import data from legacy systems. Because if we can't accomplish these visions, or we execute on these visions and the hypothesis doesn't bear out, then we need to change, right? We need to change something meaningful about the product, or maybe it's just not a good product to build, right? So in this particular case, if we can't bring data from the legacy system, then Are we really improving anything? Is there a point in continuing on with the product? Have we solved a major pain point? Is anyone even going to care about it? Or do we need to change our tactics? Or do we need to change our scope? There's all kinds of things we could change in response to this, but this is the vision. We build this thing and it's going to provide this capability, has this value, and here's what we're hoping to learn from it as well. The reason why we define a vision is because everything we do in the MVP then needs to be geared toward the vision. If it's extraneous to the vision, it's extraneous to the MVP and probably extraneous to our efforts. Those of you who are listening to this podcast who are startups, I really need you to pay attention to this because this is where most founders screw it up. They start thinking about their company in terms of their final product, and they begin to hire people that they do not need, and they begin to pay for infrastructure that they do not need, and they begin to burn through that seed round of financing at lightning speed, acquiring things that they probably will need long-term for the whole product. But listen, this MVP vision defines your world. Right? As far as you're concerned, you're in the business of producing this MVP. You are not in the business of producing the big product that you have in mind. And so this vision puts constraints on where you spend your money, where you spend your time, and what you're actually trying to get out the door. It includes the features that you're going to put into the MVP. If a feature does not support this vision, it's not going in, right? It involves who we hire. Right? If we don't need to hire a person to accomplish this vision, then we don't hire them. It includes the infrastructure we pay for. If we do not need to set up an on-premises multiple server environment, then we don't to accomplish the vision, right? If we don't need to get on the cloud and spin up, 50 cores, then we don't, right? Now, we don't want to paint ourselves into a corner. We may need to have some discussions about the future just to make sure that we aren't hamstringing ourselves. But for the purposes of our focus, where we're really spending our time and our money and effort, this is all dictated by the vision. And that's one of the reasons the vision is so important. The other is its motivational factor, right? And the focus that it brings to our efforts. But we really want to be oriented around accomplishing that vision and the business decisions around it. Even if you're a huge company that's been in business for years, again, if you don't need a team to accomplish the vision, then don't form a team. If you can do it by yourself on the weekend, do it by yourself on the weekend. If you don't need a lot of infrastructure to accomplish the vision, don't bring in the infrastructure. You really have to get into the mindset again that it's our mission to produce this MVP, not the big product we have in our heads. This MVP kind of defines the entire world. And where the rubber really meets the road is by the time we put together the MVP and we look at the scope of it, we look at how we're going to measure it, and we look at the cost and we look at the timeline and we think, you know what? I'm just not willing to spend that amount of money to accomplish this vision. Well, that's valuable insight because why do you think you would spend the money to accomplish the whole thing, right? If the value of a very small subset of your product is not worth the time and money and effort it would take to produce that very small subset of value, why is it a good idea to build the whole thing, right? That's your cue right there. If you're like, this MVP isn't worth doing, your project isn't worth doing. Oh, no, Phil, you don't understand. Once we add this feature set and that feature set and that feature set, and we add this feature set, then it's going to be worth it. You are on the road to spending a ton of money to fail. That is exactly the mindset that is going to get you there. You really need to be thinking about the limited scope of the MVP, financing it, building it, getting it out the door as quickly as possible, and then seeing what happens. We were working with a startup not too long ago, and man, this is where it kept biting them. Thankfully, they're doing very well right now. They're a great company with great leadership, but at the time, they really struggled because we would produce a minimum amount of usable functionality, and they were like, oh, but we don't want to release this until it has this. Well, we don't want to release this until it has this other thing. Well, we really don't want to put this in the hands of a store until we can do this. And they had a workable, minimal, valuable product, but they just could not see their way clear to get it out the door, to get it in the hands of a store who could give us feedback, users who could give us feedback to shape the direction of the project. They were hiring salespeople, bringing on data specialists, doing all this stuff because the big product would need all that stuff. And they just burned through their funding like a wildfire and found themselves in kind of dire straits from a funding perspective. It wasn't real clear if they were going to be able to continue or not. Now, thankfully, they were able to secure more funding. And like I said, now they're doing great. But it really caused problems for them. And so we really have to get into the mindset of keeping ourselves constrained to the value proposition that the vision articulates for us. Because if that isn't worth doing, then the project isn't worth doing. And that is valuable information, right? You might save yourself a whole lot of heartache. So that's the deal behind the vision. There's not a lot to it, a handful of sentences, but that handful of sentences is so powerful in motivating your developers, motivating your potential audience, and giving you a clear focus of where your time and money is going to go. Thanks everyone for listening to Agile Bites. Agile does sometimes bite, but we don't think it always has to. If you enjoyed what you heard today, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you happen to be using. And if you can, leave us a comment because we'd love to hear your feedback. What things would you like to hear about? What things did you hear that were valuable to you today? You can also head over to integrityinspired.com to sign up to our email list. But that's all for today, folks. We'll see you next time.